Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is March 17th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, the biggest news of them all today is the fact that Putin is officially a wanted international criminal. Yes, you heard me. It's officially done. Now, the reason why might be a little bit surprising, which surprised me. And here it says that now they issued these warrants on Putin because he's responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation of population, children, and that of unlawful transfer of population, children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation is obviously against the Rome Statute. Um, and so to me, that really was surprising because, look, that is already horrific in itself that, they've deported allegedly close to 17,000 kids to Russia. But what about all the other atrocities that Putin has committed? Taking hostage a nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, torture chambers, destruction of infrastructure, the energy sector, right? Trying to freeze to death the entire Ukrainian population, stealing their resources, all the grain that they've stolen, and then sold in the black market or whatever. What about all the killings, the innocent civilians that died in all the cities in Ukraine that have perished, the innocent kids, the maternity wards that they've destroyed, the hospitals that they've targeted, the airports, the hospitals, I've already said that, the schools. Guys, the list goes on. There's so many war crimes that haven't been mentioned, in this announcement. To me, it's very surprising. Now, it's a good first step, don't get me wrong, but I think that there's a lot more to it. And, Putin has earned enough to, not even a lifetime, but a trillion years worth in prison, right? But the true suffering is going to come once, I feel like once he's gone, and then I do believe in karma. So, anyways, so the other very important thing about it is that this means also that the West no longer sees a diplomatic option to resolve this conflict with Putin. They've tried too many times. Putin had his chance for the last year to pull off his army, right, to still save face somehow. And he didn't choose any of these avenues. He still doubled down and continued with this brutal war against Ukraine. This means that now the West has a very strong position in what they see as a good resolution to this war, which is Putin's, true judgment of Putin, the destruction of his regime and the Russian army, and a complete reform, the same type of reform that happened after World War II and Nazi Germany had to go through decades of brutal reforms, but it was needed. And the other important part here that I've mentioned in this slide is that no world leader will want to be seen along with Putin anymore. They don't want any of these photos with them shaking hands with Putin anymore. So Putin is going to become more isolated. You can bet that he's probably not going to be leaving Russia anymore, or he's going to be leaving towards the countries that don't abide by that Rome Statute. And I think that includes also Ukraine and China and the United States. But you guys know what I mean, right? Like no Macron or Scholz or other European or North American leader is not going to want to shake hands with him. So he's just stuck to his evil coalition of China, Belarus, Iran, and North Korea, right? And Syria. That gives you about 5 to 6. There's probably, some other countries like Venezuela. But you understand, right? Like Putin is completely isolated at this point, and everybody understands that he needs to go. Now, following my video that I posted a couple of days ago about the incident that happened over the Black Sea, I told you guys that the real response from the West and the United States is going to be in the form of lethal aid, more lethal aid to Ukraine. And here we go. Last couple of days, Poland and Slovakia confirmed that they're going to be sending MiG-29s. It's kind of not very clear the amount. I know Slovakia said that they're going to be sending 13 MiG-29s, and Poland about a dozen MiG-29. So that gives about 25 to 30. And I think that part of them are not going to be fully functional MiG-29s. They're just going to be used for spare parts and things like that. So it's a huge step up because Ukraine's been asking for these MiGs for the past year. And only now they get them, but I think they get them because now the West really understands that they need to give everything possible so Ukraine wins this as fast as possible. And so I bet you that the next couple of weeks, Ukraine's going to be getting an announcement. There's going to be an announcement that Ukraine is sending pilots to the United States to train for the F-16s, and then they're going to get long-range missiles. So these announcements will start popping off, I think, in the next couple of weeks instead of the next couple of months. So that's awesome. I'm really happy that these MiG-29s are going to go to Ukraine, because they're also the pilots, Ukrainian pilots know how to fly them. They've been trained on these jet fighters specifically. Now, this is a very cool article. It's a German article, but I've translated it here, and you can do so as well if you follow the link below. But I thought it was really interesting because this article kind of confirms why Russia and its army are going to lose within the end of this year, which I really believe is the case. And generally speaking, we could also give them perhaps early 2024, but I really think that Russia won't be able to continue fighting this type of warfare, and we're not going to be talking about Russia next year and how they're fighting in Bahamut. And I think we're going to be talking about how Russia is dealing with all the little fires that have spread out once they lose this war within their country. So the first point, and there's so many great, it's a very long article, so there's a lot of points here, but I've highlighted some of the important ones that I read. So before the war, Russia was able to produce around 100 main battle tanks per year. And that was under better economic conditions in the past, before the war, obviously. But at the current attrition rate of 5 tanks per day of combat, they would need to produce about 1,500 of them per year to even out the attrition. They've lost 2,000 tanks in the last year. And you can imagine that Russia has no capacity to build this amount of tanks per year. So they're running at a negative. That's why you see them now pushing for old T-62s. They're barely modernized. You see them, running T-72s that are exploding every time. And I wouldn't be surprised if they still have a stockpile of T-55s and T-54s that we're going to see in the next few months, right, by the summer. That's what we're dealing with at this point. They're pulling off just old 1950s and 1960s era equipment. So I think that gives you some food for thought. Russia's army is pretty much bare. There's nothing left to get. The border with Finland, Kaliningrad, and the far east is bared. Everything that Russia has in terms of operational material is in Ukraine. And there's an article somewhere that I read a couple weeks ago that said that about 90% of Russia's army is in Ukraine right now, or close to the border with Ukraine, right? So that leaves about 10% of the Russian army protecting millions of square miles of barren territory that anyone could just infiltrate. And Ukraine has really shown that how sensitive and how weak the Russians are with their defense, right? Just UAVs flying everywhere in Russia, and nobody's intercepting them because they don't have an army anymore in Russia. So that's a huge weakness that Russia's going to have to deal with once they lose this war. Now, and this is the same case with the Battle of Vuhledar in February, which ended disastrously. Russia's operations management was uncoordinated and unfocused. The Russians lost an estimated 130 mechanized systems, and even more by today, most likely. In Bakhmut's case, the Russians also they tried to break through, and they weren't able to do so, essentially. So the last few months, we're all talking about this major Russian offensive. It already happened, and that's the peak of it. Like right now, that's what the Russian offensive was all about. I can't see them, perhaps it can escalate a little bit more in April. But that's the extent of the Russian offensive that was supposed to happen, guys. And to say that it was positive, it was disastrous in reality. Yes, they gained some ground in Bakhmut, and which I'll get to right now. But apart from that, guys, like every single other campaign that they've opened up, whether it be in Kremina, or in Svatove, or in Dvorichna, or in Avdiivka, or in Vuhledar, have been disastrous. They haven't really gained anything. And so now let me get to Bakhmut, because obviously it's not great what's happening there. You can see that the Russians have gotten some ground. And if we look at the last couple days, so you can see that they've gained some ground between the villages of Chromove and Orikhovo-Vasilivka. So now they're trying to push towards this front here, right? more towards the plain fields, sort of like fighting between the two highways of the T0405 highway and the other highway that goes to Slavyansk. As you can see here, that's a major goal, and Kramatorsk as well. The Russians really have, I think that's their main goal right now, is to try to push towards these two cities. And the same goes here. They kind of are trying to kind of push in three different directions. And so, as you can see here, the last couple of days, now the fighting between the Russians and the Ukrainians is inching closer and closer towards the city center, which is right around here, right? And the Russians gained some ground in the south. There's some, a couple blocks in the south that they control. And the fault line on the east is the Bakhmutska River, as you can see here. So the Russians are trying to cross. It's a very narrow, small river that isn't that difficult to cross, but it still, gives enough, terrain for the Ukrainians to be able to defend it. So the Russians are struggling to cross this Bakhmutska River as they're trying to get closer to the city center. And so this is what's happening right now. It's not looking good. You can see that the Russians have some high ground at the very top, at the north of Bakhmut, so they can easily but see the Ukrainian soldiers within the city center. So it's really brutal at this point. We'll see. I think the Ukrainians, as I've said, they're slowly pulling out, defending until they will not be able to defend anymore, right? And inflicting as many casualties as possible until the Russians will be able to close that pocket. And the default, I think, new defensive line will be in Chasiv Yar. So that's why I'm expecting this Ukrainian counteroffensive to happen very quickly in the next few weeks, because I think that the Ukrainians no longer want the Russians to continue the same brutal kind of warfare that they've had with Bakhmut, right? Just destroying the city, pulverizing it to bits, and then advancing. And that's how they've done it in Lysychansk, in Severodonetsk, in Mariupol. That's the only way they can do it. And it takes a very long time for them to be able to push through, because the amount of shells you need to shoot to destroy these cities. You saw it. Russia had to literally spend close to 50 or even 60,000 shells per day back in the summer in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk in order to take it, right? The Ukrainians just couldn't, they couldn't tolerate this amount of shelling. So obviously they had to pull off. The amount of losses on the Ukrainian side was high as well, but they made them pay for it. And look, the Russians didn't push after. They kind of stopped around Bilohorivka area here. That was the extent, right? They weren't able to push further at their peak. Same thing with Kremina. And so I think that really at that point, once the Ukrainians stop the Russians at Bakhmut, the counteroffensive is just going to obliterate the Russians. They're not going to have anybody left to defend their lines, right? Because they've spent so much on the offensive trying to pull off some victories, try to really push out as much as possible, that they're just going to be, it's going to be another blitzkrieg. That's my expectation. It can be more difficult, right? We're expecting these grand things, and I might be totally wrong. It could be that it could be more difficult because the Russians have built a lot of lines of defense. But if you don't have the army to defend these lines, then it's going to be a very quick rout, in my opinion. But obviously, it's never going according to plan. So Ukrainians might also have kind of a difficulty during this counteroffensive like they did back in the Kharkiv offensive. If you guys remember, in the early stages of not the Kharkiv, the Kherson, we're in Kherson here, but the early phase of the Kherson offensive, back in early September, the Ukrainian gains were not that great. And I remember people saying, oh, that's the maximum that Ukrainians can do, is just, take Arkhangelsk, Vysokopilya. They were just like, oh, Ukraine's done for. They can't even grab like Kherson in a week, like that doesn't happen like that. And then we eventually saw within 2.5 months, boom, all this was back in Ukrainian control. Boom. All this was back in Ukrainian control. Insane gains against the second best army in the world. So there you go, guys. This is my analysis of the battle situation. Let me know what you think. If I'm wrong on certain points, again, it's my opinion. I could be totally wrong. But I can't wait to hear back from you in the comments section. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe to my channel. Please like this video, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.